Welcome to the podcast, The Other Woman and the Wife, where we discuss why infidelity exists and what we can learn from it. Today, I'm in the studio with Anne-Marie. You can basically expect her to be in the studio with me always. And, today's episode, we're really going to focus on mother's happiness. And my intent with this episode is that it lands on Mother's Day. So if you are a mom and you are listening to this podcast, firstly, happy Mother's Day. And I hope that I'm not the first person to tell you this, but maybe I'm the second. Maybe you already told yourself happy Mother's Day. Anne-Marie and I, we both had seen this one TikTok that and I'm sure that, if you are on TikTok, you've already seen this clip. But basically, the host says she's educating her co-host on, do you know what the number one indicator of a thriving child is? And the co-host had responded and said, father in the home. And she kind of smiles and she says, no, it's actually the quality of the mother's happiness, which I can get behind that stat real fast. I also think that whenever we look at the quality of someone's happiness, we're able to see what it is that pours into them and what is taking out of them. And, Anne-Marie spent a bunch of time researching aspects of this episode that we wanted to bring to you guys. And one of my concerns with doing this episode, which I told Anne-Marie earlier, was that you would go and take this episode and assert that somebody you love or that loves you is the person who needs to be listening to this episode. And I think it's really funny when I do this. Whenever I see something that resonates with me and I feel like my life would be better if my husband could, really grasp whatever concept it is that struck me. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. Sometimes I need the reality check and the understanding. I don't really need to tell him what he needs to understand because I think it's important. I was a little bit worried about doing this episode because I was nervous that some of you might be like, oh, I can't wait to make my husband listen to this episode because then he'll understand why he needs to be impacting my happiness level more positively and qualitatively. So let's go ahead and get into it, shall we?
Okay. Well, I actually thought this week's episode we could open with a question.
Okay.
So, what is your most memorable experience of Mother's Day? And let's say the rose and or the thorn. So,
oh yes, rose and thorn. I will say that in the history of me being a mother, the most memorable experience that I have of a Mother's Day that was for me was in 2020. I was pregnant with our third child and the world was shut down, as we all know. And I really wanted this specific Chinese food for dinner, for just like my Mother's Day meal. But everything was shut down and I knew that eating this food as takeout wasn't going to be that good because I'm a definite believer that food tastes better when it's hot and when it's fresh. So what my husband had done was he had put a folding picnic table in the back of his truck and a few chairs. And he took me, my mom, our kids, and we sat on the sidewalk outside this restaurant. We ordered takeout, but we ate it right there because this restaurant was like 45 minutes away from our home. And I really wanted the fresh food. So that was probably one of the best experiences of Mother's Day. It was not well planned out. It was very quick planning. It wasn't even, that big, but it was like the gesture, the thoughtfulness, the consideration that Stan had taken as far as what I wanted, and not just what I wanted, but what I wanted to experience. So I think that that was probably my rose. What about you, Anne Marie?
My rose, I would say, was probably last year. It was like, so for me, it was like the opposite. It was the first Mother's Day where things were like opened up. And we actually live like 3 hours from immediate family. So Mother's Day has been quieter the last couple of years. But like this one, I went out and I got a coffee and I went to the bookstore and I got a brew and I walked down by our canal and I read a book. And it was this very like peaceful, like my husband made dinner when I got home and had the kids, and I got to go and have a day of like a day to myself and off with the kids. And that was definitely the one that stands out to me at the moment.
I love that. As far as your mindset, what was your mindset like when you had the best experience of Mother's Day?
I felt seen. Like my mindset was like that my husband had actually put thought into what I needed, and it
Mhm.
wasn't like a game day with the kids or a park adventure or it was actually to remove me from the house and let me actually have a few moments. Like there was a lot of quiet, like it was just very a lot of solitude that I was having trouble getting with a 1-year old at home and 7-year old.
You felt more appreciated as an individual, less about the role that you play.
Yeah, and I felt like a lot of calm, like it was a quiet getaway, and it made me feel
Mhm.
seen.
I think that as far as my thorn goes for Mother's Day, it actually does have a lot to do with my mindset. When I had my first Mother's Day with our daughter, Layla, my expectations were through the roof. They were through the roof in the sense that I I wanted a big hurrah. I wanted, or at least I thought I wanted. I definitely don't. Now that I look back, I'm like, God, that's so exhausting. Like some of the ways that I wanted to be loved were pretty focused on external perception.
Mm.
So, like, whenever I think about the why, like, what does this experience that I want result in that I'm after so badly? And when it comes to my expectations around Mother's Day, when I first became a mother, I was like, well, I'm hoping that I get a handwritten card with maybe a few essays about how amazing of a mother I am. And how about I also get more flowers than I've ever received in my life? Like it was almost like I was looking for a way for him to prove to me that like I was a good mom and like he saw it, but I only wanted the proof in a way that I wanted it. Or like I even think about, people who like go onto social media and they like take a picture of their spread that their husband has like done for them or whatever. I'm always like, was it as enjoyable? Because I think if it was, you would be less concerned about telling everybody on social media and you'd be more enjoying the moment that you're in. And so then I started to kind of like deep dive into like, why do I want, a 5-page essay from him about like how good of a mom I am? Like, does he really need to do that for me to feel like he appreciates me as a mom? Like, why do I have to dictate what he does for me on Mother's Day? And that was, I'll never forget that Mother's Day, not because it was miserable, but because I kind of made it miserable. I had these expectations inside of my head that weren't grounded in who my husband was and also like culturally like, I really had to get through a lot of shit because growing up in America, it's like, well, they better do it. Otherwise, they don't love you. And that's such a falsehood. Like, I married a Chinese man who has Eastern influences, who was like, what the fuck is Mother's Day? And why are people taking the bait? He's like, this has everything to do with sales. And it was really hard for me to like navigate those waters because then I would do this thing where I compared my husband to my dad. Well, my dad does this for the women that he loves. Like, geez, really grosses me out whenever I think about that stuff now.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Well, and what would you say your mindset was?
My mindset was, if he doesn't do the way that I want it, then it isn't satisfactory.
Mm.
And then I was like, do I really want a gift or do I just want to tell people what to give me?
Yeah, I might have went through a few years of being a little bit like that myself.
Yeah, I definitely did. I had this idea in mind of what Mother's Day was supposed to look like, what my husband was supposed to do for me on Mother's Day. And once I kind of was like, what if I got rid of all of the rules that I had for how somebody else is supposed to act in the world and show appreciation? And I just started focusing on, if I wanted it, then I could get it for myself type thing. So if I want to get like a few dozen roses, I will.
Yeah, I agree. Things got a lot easier when I started doing that for myself. Just being like, oh, if I want it, I should just get it for myself. And then I don't have to wait for it. So coincidentally, my thorn was also my first like Mother's Day. I had like a 1 month old. He was born in like mid-March. So I was still like in like the throes of new motherhood, and I just remember Mother's Day. We like had to do the tour cuz he was the new baby and he's like the only baby on my husband's like side. And I just remember like waking up and I remember it being like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm a mom and I got a squishy baby. And like, wasn't like it was a bad day. But I remember getting to each thing, like getting to like my in laws and getting to my mom's house and like how everyone's like, Happy Mother's Day. And then like grab the baby and then like hyper focused on the baby the whole time. And I just remember being like, I got dressed. I put my big like tummy tucker on. I like, like it had been such a process. And then it was like a day that was like supposed to be about the mom. And I remember like my expectation was really low and it like wasn't really met. Just in that like it was just everybody crowding around the new baby. And I remember that one feeling very unseen. And in a way, I was like, it kind of felt intentional. Like the moms were like, welcome to the club. This is what it is. Because that's how Mother's Day used to be for me, was going to the grandmas and like, going to like church breakfast. And
Oh, I do know. And you and I have a similar thread in our stories, and it's that we ended up raising our families apart from where we were raised. And a lot of our hometown, our personal network, is still in that geographic location. And I remember putting such pressure on myself and my entire family to like show up on these holidays and stuff. And it wasn't until I really took a sit down and tried to understand myself and why I was putting that pressure, because it does feel like a performance at times. And then once you realize that, like, nobody else needs to be telling you what to do for Mother's Day or how to celebrate Mother's Day, and then you're kind of free to create what you want out of it. I will also say Mother's Day for many years, this is like, I wasn't a fucked up daughter, but I was pretty, targeted. But I did do this thing for my dad growing up where I called him my mom dad. He was both of my parents. At least this is what I told myself back then. I was like, he shows up, he provides, he does all of these things, and I adore my dad. And so I would give him Mother's Day cards every year, uh, just to appreciate him for a role that he played that wasn't necessarily one that he had signed up for. And hopefully my mother doesn't hear this episode. I think that would kind of crush her. Maybe not, though. I don't know. I don't
I
know.
don't know. Past that. So yeah, and something that I just think is both of them, both of our positive rose stories were when we felt really happy and seen. And that was a filling up moment as a mom.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of women will be like, and I am definitely guilty of this. Sometimes I think we use holidays as a way to get what we want or like influence somebody else in a way that we want them to be influenced. I'd be like, "Oh, I'm going to go like book a massage," and say, "Well, it's my Mother's Day treat." Or, go on a girls trip because it's Mother's Day. And I would do this all the time to Stan, and he would get so irritated by it. And I could never really understand why until I realized that, like, I wasn't giving him the opportunity of celebrating me on Mother's Day. I was dictating what Mother's Day should be and kind of elevating myself a little bit, like putting myself on a pedestal. And then once I realized that, like, all throughout the year, I could just say what the fuck I wanted and get what I wanted. I didn't have to like put pressure on myself to like suffer in the meantime type thing. Like, I didn't need an excuse to do what I wanted to do, basically.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of moms do that. They'll be like, "Oh, well, he has to say yes because it's Mother's Day." And I'm like, "What?"
Yeah. Yeah, I've never been one to save for a holiday. I tend to just
Yeah.
blurt things out.
Yeah, same.
So, the quality of a mother's happiness is the real indicator of a child's well being. That's the founding of the episode.
So, why is the quality of a mother's happiness the real indicator of a child's well being? And I think it all comes down to modeling. Like, if you are modeling unhappiness or misery to your children, the likelihood of them mimicking or duplicating that attitude in life is extremely high. So, and I don't think that the goal is don't be miserable, don't be unhappy. It's more about uh, from an affirmative mindset. What does make me happy? What is taking away from my happiness? What do I need to change about my circumstance to ensure that I'm able to model true happiness to my children? That isn't a toxic positive vibe. That is not a fake it till you make it. That is a I understand when I need to change my mindset or I need to change my circumstance. And I think modeling that type of adaptability is incredibly important to children because you're ultimately modeling to them what is required for personal responsibility. And I mean, it's the only thing that I think actually explains how to have happy children is by being a happy parent and being aware that as a parent, your happiness isn't in anybody else's control but your own.
Yeah. Yeah. A mother definitely, they can't fully show up and be present and nurture properly if they're stuck in fight or flight or they're really anxious. It's just they don't go hand in hand because your kids are, like you said, they're looking for modeling. So if you're living anxiously, your kid slowly begins to.
I think that was one of my favorite stories from you, actually. I can't remember who it was, but someone within your personal network was like, hey, my child is really struggling with anxiety. And they
Mhm.
knew that you do a lot of, I'll say, mindful work around your emotions. And you had said, I think you only talked to me about it, but it was basically like, well, the cure for, being able to teach your child how to manage their anxiety is by managing your own anxiety. And again, it comes back to that whole like being aware of your circumstance and how it impacts your well being. I really do think that people have lost complete touch with the concept of personal responsibility. And that's why we get so stuck in these, I'll say, these thought loops where it's like, well, if I was just happier, then my kids could be happy. Or not even that. It's more like, if I can ensure that my kids are happy, then I could be happy. And it's like, that if then statement has a dependency that really is outside of your control. Like, do you believe that children, people in general, they have the conditioned side of them and then they have the intrinsic, innate side to them? So,
So then I feel like the conundrum that made me laugh when I was thinking about this is, so the quality of the mother's happiness is one of the most important things. And yet, like, we're told that kids will bring us happiness. When you become a mother, the kids will bring us this happiness. And I mean, not everybody, obviously, but the way I was raised, it was very much that like you would get to this next stepping stone, you would have these kids, and it was going to be the thing. And then realizing that the kids, in fact, do not fill that happiness void. Just like, trust me, like, love my kids. Yes, I find lots of joy and moments with them, but they're not like we're all hungry for happiness, self-fulfillment. And then you're in this conundrum of like, but I already had the kids and I don't know how to be happy.
oh, yes. I also think that the whole, the experience of parenting will result in your happiness is absolute bullshit. Um, and I have 3 children. It's not to say that they don't, same thing as you, Anne Marie. It's not to say that I don't enjoy my children, but they are not my reason for being. And if they were, that would be a lot of pressure to be putting on a child. Like a fuck ton of pressure. I remember clearly when I was a kid, my mom coming up to me and asking if she was a bad mom, and that being a really uncomfortable and inappropriate question to be asking me at that point in time. I think it was probably like 7. And I still remember it to this day, sitting there and being like, uh, I don't know. Like, I don't know what a good mom is or a bad mom is. I just have you as my mom. And now you're asking me about whether you're a good mom or not. And I had no fucking foundational understanding of what makes a good mom or a bad mom or any of that. And I it is pretty bothersome to me when mothers are pressured to enjoy the experience of motherhood more than they innately are. I think that we're just constantly pressuring other people into roles that don't provide what they're looking for. And so the whole, well, I'll be happy if my kids are happy. You are lying. Like, happiness doesn't work that way, I don't think. And certainly not uh, individual acceptance and individual realization or actualization. I think that whenever we hinge our peace and happiness on somebody who isn't us, we're just shirking the personal responsibility that we innately need to change something, and that we're making it more difficult than it needs to be. Um, but yeah, I really, really did not like the whole mothers are told that kids will bring them happiness. Do I think that the experience of parenting will transform a human being? Absolutely. Knowing what that experience will bring you, though, you actually have to experience it. So I feel like there's a lot of content out there that's like, if you don't enjoy motherhood, well, it's probably because of childhood trauma and like all of these things that it's like you can't even correct them, or there is no cure, or there is any of isn't, there isn't a way out.
Yeah. Kids, I do believe like you do the work when your kids come along and trigger you, then if you go through that, you can reflect back and you can move forward from parenting with a lot of like good things, lots of good things. But I was not like educated on like how to do that. So when it like came time for me not to do what I said I wouldn't do, which is like I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to handle the situation like my parents did. I realized I didn't have any other way to do it.
You were using their same tools, but you weren't going to become them. I know that place in life so well. Oh, I know that place in life so well.
Yep.
And it basically is like the information that you're working off is the information they gave you. So how are you not supposed to become them?
Yeah, and so then I'm sitting there and I'm like, "Well, I can't handle it that way." So there was this period of like, I think there's like 3 types of parenting and one is considered like where you kinda just don't deal with it, like,
Passive?
kind of. But I felt like I
Huh?
wasn't being a passive parent, but there was like a couple of years where I feel like I was just in like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I have to figure out how to deal with my emotions so that I can healthily deal with their emotions. And like I had to go on the emotional maturing journey, which turned out to be very lonely, but worth it once you're through it. But yeah,
I will also say that I will never forget. I used to, in early motherhood, I would fall asleep on my phone. And Stan has quite a few photos of this. I'd be laying in bed and I would be researching every nook and cranny of information for whatever difficulty in life I was faced with. So, like at that time, it was probably sleep training. And I remember sitting there thinking, what is the problem I'm trying to solve here? Is it that I need to get my child to sleep? Is it that I need my child to stop crying? Like, and are these goals within my control type thing? And being able to really, I'll say, humble myself in in my expectations of motherhood. And whenever I think about, I remember whenever I would fall asleep with my phone, I'd be Googling things like, why do I become angry when I hear my baby cry? And instead of me searching on Google, how do I get my baby to stop crying? I needed to understand why I was so uncomfortable when my baby was crying. And that was when I started to like look into all of I guess, the neurology of the effects that make an impact on your nervous system and your emotional responses. Like, I think whenever I did Google that, like, why do I become angry when my baby cries? It had said that I was likely shamed as a child for crying, which I don't really recall. Maybe I was. Maybe I just innately felt ashamed about it. But I was like, I don't think it's that. What I felt like it was me being at peace with what wasn't in my control. And somebody else crying isn't really in my control, even my own baby, right? Like,
mhm.
this was, man, like 15 years ago. And, or no, no, no. Layla's only 7. 15. God, no. But I remember whenever I started to realize that I didn't have a handle on understanding why I reacted the way that I reacted within early motherhood. And in order for me to support my child becoming the best version of herself, I needed to make sure that I was showing up as my best version too. And then I also learned this little piece of information that has haunted me ever since I came across it. It was that the amygdala response inside of the brain, once a woman has a baby, it never shuts off. And so I became one of the lightest sleepers on the planet. I actually have this thing where I will wake up before my children make it to my bedside. Like I am already present, like and awake. Eyes are closed, but I can feel them. I can sense them. And it doesn't make for great sleep.
No.
And so then it was like, what am I going to do? Lock the door so that my kid can't come and get me whenever they have a nightmare? Maybe some nights it does warrant that. And the child has to knock at the door and daddy has to get up and do it. Or maybe I just need to get some freaking earbuds
Hmm.
and like ensure that I'm getting enough sleep when, motherhood is such a tricky experience.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But yeah,
I really had to understand how to take care of myself before I started telling everybody else what to do.
yeah. And motherhood is not an easy place to learn that lesson. It's like when you've
No.
taken on the maximum amount, maximum capacity for humans, that's when we realize that we're not very good at how we structure our own needs in things. Because that kind of leads to talking about the factors that are going to be impacting a mother's happiness. So, like, how does marriage impact a woman's happiness?
Well, so firstly, I think it depends on whatever expectations she has built up inside of her head. When I got married the first time, I had the expectation that I had security. I had security and I had achieved what so many people in the world have wanted, and therefore I should be satisfied. And I think the way that our expectations of marriage actually shape our ability to be honest with ourselves is so like unrevealed to us. Like we don't see how our expectations of marriage impact our experience of marriage or even our individual happiness. Kind of, like I think that a woman's happiness is not dependent on a role that she plays in somebody else's life. And when we do that, we are just setting ourselves up for failure each and every time.
And it's programmed, like, our expectations are based on societal conditioning. All the Disney movies, like, now they make Disney movies where the sister is the true love at the end, or the sibling, or the friend, or they're, like, on a power mission all their own. And that just wasn't something that you found when we were watching. Like, one, we had to watch specific VHSs if you didn't have the cable. So, like, some of us only saw our hard copy library of movies. But, like, when you grow up that way, and then if you grew up religious, if you grew up within any faith, it's something that's pretty heavily messaged. And so then we come into it with these expectations and we set ourselves up to fail, I feel often.
Definitely. I also think that a lot of I'll say that before I had the experience of marriage, my understanding was that married people who were unhappy, that I thought it was they were just doing it wrong. And maybe that is still kind of true. Like maybe I do feel that way still a little bit. But the idea that I was surrounded with content as a child that had villainized divorce, that had really painted women, wives specifically, as helpless. And that that it was placated, like all the narratives back then were placated with divorce indicating failure. And I think that divorce indicates divorce. Like I really started to like keep it within the reality stuff because I don't know. I don't know what everybody else's experience has been. But whenever I looked back then, it was easy to judge a woman who wasn't happy in her marriage. It was way too easy. I mean, I judged my own mother for it. Like, why can't you just stick it out? Why can't you just make him happy? You know, wishing for her to be different than what she actually was. I think that that was extremely detrimental to my own expectations of motherhood and happiness and all of that because I had cast out. It's also very easy to cast out judgment of a parent when the parents are at odds with one another and you get to pick a side and you're going to pick the side that is most productive for you as a child. And so it's interesting. It was really easy to demonize the woman when it came to unhappiness inside of her marriage. And it wasn't until I actually experienced marriage where I was like, this shit fucking sucks. Like motherhood and marriage. Not like sucks entirely, but like aspects of it for sure suck. Like to be last on the list to, I'll never forget this one coaching session I had. And this was actually a guy who had talked about how he prepares all of the meals for his family. And I asked him, I said, how do you go about determining what you want to prepare? And he goes, well, I ask everybody. I'm like, do you have an idea of what you want to eat for dinner before you ask everybody else? And he's like, no, no idea. And I think it's like some of those caretaking roles that we put ourselves in that we end up really negatively impacting our level of satisfaction in life.
Yeah, I had seen a thing, I'm just gonna read it like I just saw it this morning, but it said, "People will paint you pictures about motherhood and rainbows. You will forget that rain comes first. The brightness of the rainbow will always outshine the gray, but it's okay to talk about the gray." And I feel like I did not grow up in an environment where it was okay to talk about the gray, and this is new. Like, oh, now we talk about, like, but even when you do, there's still this layer, either remembered shame or we think that people will shame us for talking about how hard it is. But what a way to keep anything from changing, right? If we can't talk about how
Oh,
unhappy we
yeah,
are, then this is just the way it is. And I think that that was the way that I definitely saw marriage portrayed to me when I was growing up. It was just,
absolutely.
yeah. And the mother's happiness was always put to the side.
I'm going to share this with you. I think the only way that your personal happiness can be put to the side by other people is if you're putting it to the side first. Like, basically, people are taught how to treat us, right? Like, we condition them by being present in situations that we actually don't want to be present in. So it's like that desire for authenticity can't even, creep up inside of you because you're so busy performing what you think it is that everybody else wants you to be doing, you
Mhm.
know? But yeah, I do think that like getting the talking about the gray allows you to externalize it and determine what parts of it are true so that you can change it. But yeah, you were dead on when you said we're just staying the same if we're not actually talking about it.
Yeah, and, like, when it comes to marriage and parenthood, there's definite benefit in the fact that women volunteer for this role, and then they just take on those roles unless you're really modern, you know? Well, not anymore. There's more and more people are coming too, but I definitely know within my in-laws, I'm viewed as a lazy wife. I don't do all of the roles that I'm supposed to.
Really?
Oh, yeah, I don't cook.
Have they ever called you that?
Oh, no. No. But I know.
I remember whenever I felt super insecure about my ability to mother in the way that I wanted to mother around women who had already experienced motherhood. So if I was ever at my dad and stepmom's house with my baby, I felt like I was on constant display and everyone was assessing my ability to be a mother. But now, that it's been so many years, I can look back and I'm like, oh, I was just making them super judgmental inside of my head. They never actually said those things. And even when they did say like hurtful shit, or make really comments that just struck me, I'll never forget. There was this one time where I was in that Whole Foods I was talking to you about earlier, and I put my baby in the shopping cart in the little baby seat. And she was like 6 months older or something, maybe a little bit older. I don't know. She could hold her head up. I thought it was great. I was like, look at this. I have a baby and I'm putting her in a shopping cart. I've wanted this my whole life. And so I take a picture and I send it to a group text. And the first response I get is, get our baby. And this wasn't Stan who responded. I'm not going to say who said it, but they said, get our baby out of that filthy cart that is covered in germs. Like this whole thing, I felt totally shamed in the experience. Was that their intention? I don't know. But I did. I felt totally not up to snuff for like being the mother to this little baby that I had just had. And I was so pissed by that comment because I was like celebrating motherhood and I was celebrating my baby being in a shopping cart with me and going
Mhm.
grocery shopping. And for it to be met with a remark that I felt was, what are you even doing?
Mhm.
You're putting your baby at risk for catching the cold. And I got detailed in my analysis of my parenting decisions because then I was like, okay, so what am I really trying to prevent here? Her from catching a cold? Can I do that? Like, that actually something that I can do? And quickly I figured out no, she kept catching colds regardless of whether she was inside of a shopping cart or not. If you are the other woman in your relationship and you love this podcast, you would love the Other Women community. The Other Women community is a membership program designed to help other women just like you reclaim their relationship with themselves and heal from their affair. We provide a safe and supportive environment for you to open up and talk about your experiences. We give you the tools and resources you need to grow into an authentic, empowered individual. If you're ready to take the next step in your healing journey, head on over to theotherwomanandthewife.com/community to learn more about the membership and all it has to offer.
So then, if the mother's happiness is the focus, like that's what it really kind of comes back to is we like to say, how many times have we heard the phrase, we stayed for the kids, we're staying for the kids? What that's saying is we're staying in an unhappy.
Wait, hold on. I have something to say. Have you ever heard somebody say, we stayed for the kids, we made it 50 years. Thank God we stayed for the kids? I don't think I have either. Every single time that somebody finally does the admission of like, I'm staying for the kids, they're giving themselves a step up in life, I think, because once you can be honest with yourself about that, then you can kind of see what the path forward is that you need to
Mhm.
take, right?
Yep, because you're taking this external thing and that's your reasoning for not doing something for yourself that and the thing is that need's going to return to you because you're still not happy. And it's going to return to you because you're still not happy. I'm staying because my husband's not that bad and he wants to stay in the marriage. Like he's not interested in leaving. So, I mean, I guess I'll stay because it's fine. It's okay. It could be worse, right? We are so good at talking ourselves out of doing things that'll actually make us happy. And I think it's because of this fear of being seen as selfish for prioritizing ourselves.
Yeah.
Society has made martyrs out of mothers forever. That's been the praise of, like, you can't love too hard. You can't give too much. All of these things are programmed into us as little girls. And then I just feel like it is, again, just a conundrum that then you become a parent and you realize, "Oh, my happiness," like, in order to reflect happiness and joy and, like, all those positive energies for life, you have to actually be living it.
Oh, you have to practice what you
You have to
preach.
practice what you preach, and your kids are really good at reflecting it to you, and, like, we still can't, like, open up in the moment and, like, fully absorb it if our brain is off being anxious about when our husband's gonna get home
Mm,
and how that interaction's gonna go, or if it's
mm.
you're flustered from the PTSD that you don't treat because you still think of anything mental health related as like a non-priority item. I'm sure there's a lot of listeners here who have been where I've been, where I'm like, well, I got to cut somewhere. I guess it's the therapy. I'm doing okay. Like, this is my schedule's overloaded. I guess it's going to be my self care lunch that gets the cut. I guess it's gonna be that yoga class that I'm not gonna go to, even though I know I always sleep better afterwards. And every time we're doing this, we're actually not just harming ourselves, because then since we're not filling up our own cups, how are we supposed to be pouring into these small children or big children or adult children? But you can't do it.
Your bandwidth is limited.
Yeah, your capacity.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I think that women or mothers, I should say, I should get more specific. Mothers have this, I guess, this fear of being perceived as someone who didn't do enough for their children. So they're constantly doing everything for their children. And whenever I think about this, I think about I had this one client who had asked her husband to do this thing because she knew that the kids would enjoy it. And when she made this ask of her husband, the experience of even asking him was difficult. And this was a man that she was proceeding to divorce. And I asked her, I said, "What was the experience you were after?" And she was like, "I just knew it would make the kids happy." And I was like, "Right, but what would the experience have been for you as an individual? Like, just you?" And she like sat there for a second. And she's like, "I have no idea what you mean." And I'm like, "Are you constantly looking at the experience that your children are about to have, that you're missing the experiences that you are having?" And she thought about it some more. And I was like, "Think about it. You wanted your child to have this experience and your ex husband to be the provider of this experience. Now you've already like initiated, you've already put that ball into motion. And the experience for you was negative as fuck. It was so bad." And I just, whenever I think about that, that particular client, I remember, talking with her a lot and how her focus was heavily centered on her children, that she was missing her experience the entire time, just completely strapped with energy, being diverted into areas that were causing more dysfunction than harmony. And I feel like once we are aware of the experience that we want to have inside of motherhood, then we can get it. If we're constantly focusing our experience of motherhood on who's experiencing us as a mother, we're never going to like get our ducks in a row, you know?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I agree with that statement.
So let's go ahead and talk about the mothers who are mothers kind of in your local community, but not necessarily your mother, like other women in the community that you live in that are also mothers, and what role they play in your child's life.
We were talking about when we reflected back to like which moms stuck out to us as kids or growing up that we actually have stark memories of being like, wow, this is a good mom, or not even good, but this mom made me feel like I like going to their house. Like this mom created an environment. And
Ah,
I
the
remember,
mom who was compelling, but she wasn't your mom.
yes, and I remember, and this isn't to say like there was no desire to trade households, but I remember there was this mom that just, she would say things like, a family that games together stays together. She would come in and play with us, and we would all play Mario Kart, or we would all play, they always had the newest game system or something. And we played so many games. It's funny because I'm pretty sure that that mother did end up divorced, but it was just the energy whenever you went there. She was just present. She wanted to actually interact with us, and we actually loved it, having a mom come in and be like, let's do this stuff.
She was genuinely interested in you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you'd bump into her, she would ask you about, she'd be like, "Oh, how's this going?" Like, she didn't pretend not to be involved in some of the happenings of the 7th grade or whatever grade we were in, and
That's so
I loved
cute.
that.
Yeah, she indulged you guys.
Mhm.
Whenever I think about women in my childhood that were um, sincerely role modeling to me, but they didn't know it because it was certainly my experience, not theirs. It was always the women who I feel like had a fuller sense of who they were and what made them happy. So they were less resentful about their role of motherhood, and they were able to enjoy it with the children. Like I think that, you touching on her playing with you guys, I definitely think that I've embodied and embraced the philosophy that children learn through play. And so, if I'm taking time out to play with my children, or even whenever I'm having like a moment to teach them where I'm frustrated, right? Because I do get frustrated, I realize that I can like make a funny face while my child has this really bad attitude. And it's not to um, assuage their feelings or anything, but at least get them to a place where they can communicate effectively what's going on. Otherwise, it will just become a screaming match and nothing gets solved when people don't feel heard. And I just think that through the language of play, we're able to strengthen the bonds that we have with our children, and we can also improve the experience of motherhood that we are having.
Mhm. But man, is it hard to play when you aren't good at turning it off, like turning off the rest of the world and like just hanging out, that do not disturb button like can do such wonders.
Dude, that motherhood actually brought me to a place where I finally wanted to understand the benefits of like plant medicine. And I'm talking about weed here, you guys. Not that like
Not
cool, or
herbs.
not even cool. I don't think I could say cool. Yeah, herb. But I remember being so hyper anxious. Like I didn't even realize what a control freak, how riddled with anxiety I was until I had a child, because then it was like, oh my God, I'm responsible for an entire human experience here. I was not cut out for that. I remember being like, I just need something to help quiet my mind so that I can actually enjoy the experience of motherhood that I'm having. And I remember like basically getting stoned once and watching my daughter marvel at her hand. She just started like studying it. It was like this. And I was captivated in that moment. Like all of a sudden, all of the stress that I had around sleep training and nutrition and coping skills and all of my understanding of human development didn't seem so urgent at that moment because it was the moment that I was in that actually demanded my attention and how much I could actually trust her to develop her own experience in the world. Um, so yeah, you're right. Like being able to quiet the intense voices, I'll say, inside of your head about what you should be doing, what you could be doing, what you're doing wrong, all of that. Um, you really do have to figure out where that volume button is and getting yourself the help that you need in order to bring it down a notch.
Yep. And another like ways to like start improving your happiness that we've already touched on a bit are things like self-care and like presence and recognition of those things. But also, I think a big one that is hard for mothers, and this is hard for all humans raising kids, is asking for help and not trying to do it all yourself. Because it's not even while I was doing that research, I was looking around at stuff, and it's so important for there to be other healthy adult role models in your kid's life. Like you do them a favor when you reach out. For me, I don't really make mom friends the best. I'm kind of an anxious parent when I go to things. And but the truth is, once I started walking with the moms, I would converse for a couple of blocks each day. And turns out all of us have the same needs. We all just want to be able to go get groceries for a couple hours. And have I reached out and set up those play dates to not yet, getting there, but the reality is we like lean on those communities, create your own communities to help you.
Yeah, the whole like it takes a village to raise a child mentality. Um, I can't imagine that being closer to the truth. On the whole, like being able to know when to ask for help. There's this article that I shared with you, Anne Marie, and it's from The Atlantic. And I swear, if my content becomes like politicized or something, I will be so grossed out. I don't really pay much attention to political affiliation, even though I know that it exists. I know that there's like some type of political charge here, but it points out this one thing that happened back in the 90s. And I found it so interesting because I feel like you have moms who pride themselves on developing communities. And then you also have moms who pride themselves on being able to do it all themselves. Um, but it's not really about the women's pride, right? Like we're talking about what is the outcome for a child when a mom has clarity around what really matters that she's doing in her experience of parenting. And I'm going to read this one little excerpt, and it says in 1996, Hillary Clinton, then the first lady of the United States, published It Takes a Village and Other Lessons Children Teach Us. Clinton's book and the proverb the title referenced argue that children's lives are shaped by many people in their neighborhood: firefighters and police officers, garbage collectors, teachers, and coaches. At that year's Republican convention, Bob Dole, the nominee for president, took on Clinton's thesis by emphasizing the role that community members can play in a child's life. He suggested the First Lady was minimizing parents' responsibilities, a subtle attack on family values. With all due respect, Dole said, I'm here to tell you, it does not take a village to raise a child. It takes a family to raise a child. The crowd roared. And I think that our understanding of these two different positions has been validated by actual information that has been studied. And the article basically goes on to say, parents are faced with many, many, many decisions when it comes to parenting and really figuring out which decisions that really matter as it relates to the outcome. And it basically is able to arrive at the point that the thing that really matters is community. Like, does your child have a lot of sincere role models of people who are, I'll say, adequately fulfilled by the experiences that they are having? Or are they people who hate their jobs? Are they people who are constantly complaining about their current situation in life? And this particular article really struck me because I get pretty scientific with my choices and trying to understand what is best. When I finally came around to the idea that, like, what is best for one person may not be the best thing for another, and that best is subjective. And I was really responsible for just trying my best. That's it. Like, it didn't need to result in the best. I just needed to try my best. And, I feel like I use that as a marker for my own kids. If they do something and they're disappointed in the results of it, I always ask them, like, did you try your best? And they're like, yes. I'm like, well, then that's great. That's all you had to
Mhm.
do. Like, get the other stuff kind of out of the way, type thing. And I think that if you have the mentality that you are the only person on the planet that your child needs, you're kind of setting your child up for the worst possible outcome, which is the inability to ask for help when you need it. Um, and I know that that probably sounds harsh.
And as the mother, you're definitely setting yourself up for burnout. Undisputed. Undisputed that mindset is how you end up burned out, and then you're asking for help, and it's not in the fashion that you want it to be. It's not in, like, a collected, "I know I need this help." It's like, "I'm already past my limit, and now I really need the help."
Yep. Yes. And when I realized how much I enjoyed uh, being a dependable person within my own community. And I didn't realize this until I started this business, but I'm a pretty well-oiled machine whenever it comes to building a community. I am quick to understand how vulnerability plays a role in developing communities. I can work really hard to make other people feel comfortable in asking me for help. And I also have gotten really comfortable in being honest when I can't. For a while, I was kind of killing myself for other people because if not me, then who? And really being able to put down other people's responsibilities. Yes, I can be generous and helpful and all of those things. I don't have to be them 100% of the time. And I certainly don't have to agree to everything that's asked of me. And I also think that whenever I get my children around other influences that aren't me or their dad, I get to see a aspect of them kind of light up. And whether that's art, whether that's gaming, whether it's computers or veterinarians and stuff like that, I think it expands their worldview without me having to teach them.
Mhm.
And they get to develop, I'll say, their own internal voice of being able to determine what's next for them, what they want that's next for them.
It's a controlled environment to, like, put them into and watch how they do on a small scale, 'cause otherwise, you're still gonna get to the teen years, they're still gonna have to go out on their own, and now they'll
Yeah.
just be, it's better to have the interactions in small proportions as they grow up, other rather than, because it's gonna happen eventually.
It is. And if I'm not the one who is, showing them how to go about interacting with the world around them, then I'm just waiting for the world to teach them instead. So by, putting my children in different communities, and we've moved like 4 times so far. And is it hard? Yes. Is it a lot of grief? Yes. But I also think that I get the opportunity to model adaptability to my kids. And I also get the opportunity to expose them to schools of thought that are not my own. There was this one moment where I had heard a parent say, you can't have the type of molding effect on a child unless you are their parent. And I was like, I actually don't want to mold my children. I really want to discover who my children are. I want to help them discover who they are. I certainly don't want them to become dependent on me telling them what to do because that sounds miserable for both of us. Um, and I want them to be able to lead themselves well in their own life. And if I really want that, then I have to give them the opportunity to do just that. On the topic of infidelity and the quality of a mother's happiness, I want to share a story with you, Anne Marie, about one of my first clients. And when this client had come to me, she was pretty close to signing away her rights for her children. And I really had to, withhold my own personal bias because I didn't want that for her. I didn't want that for the kids, but I needed her to be the one to determine that for herself. And so I had asked her, what is it about motherhood that's been so challenging for you? And she was like, well, I'm an awful mom. I'm so bad at it. Like every bad behavior that my child has is because of me. And it really, really stung to hear a mom talk like that about herself, even though I didn't have any insight into who she was. But I'm pretty genuinely like, you're not concerned if you're a bad mom when you are a good mom. Bad moms aren't concerned with being a bad mom. And so then when I had asked her, like, tell me about the thoughts that you have that seem to bring upon this feeling of you being a bad mom. And she started to relate to me how often she had to hear her ex-husband shame the shit out of her. So anytime that her kids did something incorrect or socially unacceptable, the blame was cast onto her, and that she was uniquely or individually responsible for her children's behavior. And this narrative that she had in her head was being perpetuated by her abuser. So she started to believe the things that he had to say about her. So the idea that she was a bad mom was a seed that was planted by someone other than her who was disappointed that he was being left out of her personal choices. So the way that he could get back at her is fuck with her mind. She did start to believe, I'll say, the shameful thoughts that had been perpetuated around her. And, you know, I'm glad that this client came to me when she did, but I also had a really hard time listening to some of the stuff that her husband had to say about her, to her, to people in her local community. I was absolutely shocked by uh, how mean somebody could be to somebody else's mom. Like, that's how I saw it. I was like, how can you possibly say these things about a woman who chose to go down this path with you? And even though she has parted ways with you, you still want her to believe that she's less than you. And it still eats away at me. It disturbs me to my core. Um, but yeah, that client, her responsibility in those moments, I think, was to remove herself from conversations that perpetuated an unhelpful narrative. Her personal responsibility in that moment was to surround herself with content that inspired her to become the best mom that she wanted to be for herself and for her children. She did not have a responsibility to listening to the shit that some other person who was hurt had to say about her. Like that person's bar was so far from the measure of success that I just couldn't imagine anybody taking him seriously.
Yeah. It's hard to combat when people go at it that aggressively.
This guy was like legit shitting on her on Facebook with everybody watching. And I'm like, if this man was actually concerned, if he was actually concerned whether you were a bad mom, do you think that he would be telling you? No, he
Mhm.
just wants to hurt you. And this is something that I'm having to come around to because I always love to assume the best of people. And I'm like, oh, had I not had the insight that I did through coaching sessions with her and stuff, I would have been like, oh, well, he's probably just really struggling to understand his own path forward. But when she started showing me receipts and shit, I was like, oh, dear God. Like, you poor thing. Let's talk about what being a good mom feels like to you. Like, let's explore it. Let's really come up with some type of indicator that allows you to believe in your ability to be a good mom instead
Mhm.
of believing what other people have decided to speculate about your experience of motherhood. And like,
Mhm.
even whenever I think about who can have an accurate opinion of you as a mother? And this actually goes back to whenever my mom asked me, whenever I was a little girl, is I was like, the only person who can have a valid and accurate opinion of your parenting is your child. And that opinion will not even be able to be formed for so long.
Mhm.
And even that perspective would have to be validated by like making sure that that individual has a lens of perception that's pretty squeaky clean. And that
Mhm.
all of those externalities are not like in your control type
Yep.
thing.
And then the question is, are you like an absorber of that? Do you really embody the opinions of others, the opinions of who you're with? And that's how come emotional abuse it's so damaging, and society likes to downplay it because you can't see it. It needs to be like more at the forefront, and it is becoming more and more, but there's so many people that are like, emotional abuse, what's that? Like, they just have no concept of it yet. And
Mhm.
the way that it, like, you embody it and you believe it to the point where your client was actually going to give up the kids, like, she believed it, that she had nobody telling her otherwise, and she had no
Mhm.
intuition of who she was.
And also, this is what I'll say, like, particular case, that particular client and coaching relationship, has certainly evolved, but if you are around people that you don't respect at all, you should not be ingesting whatever opinions or beliefs they have about you, because that's just absolutely wild to me. Like, that would be what's a good analogy here? That would be like going to a plumber for electrician work. I think that you empower yourself by surrounding yourself with information that is accurate, true, and good. When you're consuming the opinions of your ex husband who has made your transgressions against him public, and he's cloaking it as care for the children, um, I wouldn't even read anything he wrote. I would probably be like, we are resigned to email communication only. And actually, you know what? Here's a mediator. You can only access me through this person. You have no more access to me. And I kind of wish that I had it in me to say those types of things to people directly, but I'm still feeling out this whole thing.
I think it's better sometimes to let them get there themselves if you wanna actually see the change. It's so tempting to be like how we started this episode, this is not an episode to take to a spouse or a partner and be like, "Hey, my happiness is important. Now listen to everything listen to how crazy my life it is out there," whatever.
Yeah. Whenever I think about her and her situation, she did want to take responsibility for everybody else's behavior. And even when there was like definite details of domestic violence, I'll never forget me asking her, what did I ask her? She had said, well, he pulled me out of bed by my hair and dragged me into the other room. And I said, what happened moments before that? Or she was like, but I deserved it. And I was like, what do you mean you deserved it? And she had said, well, I had said something that triggered him. And I'm like, you think that because you used your words to communicate that somebody else can put their hands on you, like that it is your fault? And the jump that you have to make, I think, psychologically, to be to really be able to grasp the idea that somebody else's behavior is a reflection of them, not you. Like, I cannot provoke somebody to put their hands on me without their willingness to put their hands on me. Like, that's a very difficult concept for some people to wrap their heads around, because we are so married to the idea of we just have to tell our side of the story. We just have to tell our side of the story. No, wait, I need to get one last word in. And it's like, nope, enough words have been spoken between the two of you. Please divide and conquer.
Mhm.
That's what I'm going to start calling divorce, dividing and conquering.
Dividing and conquering. Yeah.
Oh, you know what quote I would actually love to end this cast episode with is it, I believe it's by Carl Jung, and it's a quote that says, "If you don't know who you are, the world will tell you for you." And so, like, even gathering an understanding of the world, it's like whenever I think about like the affair and like how my life has changed 10 years past, I remember my life being led by theoretical conclusions that I had adopted inside of my own belief system. Marriage would make me happy, motherhood would make me happy. Until I really freed myself of those things, I didn't know what made me happy. It took me a long time. It took me a long time to realize that like I participated in so many activities that were unproductive to my well-being, and how external my focus was instead of internal. So yeah. So thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. And if you haven't rated or reviewed it, we would appreciate it, so that we can continue on this mission that we are on as far as blowing up the conversation of infidelity. And we hope you have a wonderful Mother's Day. And I hope you are doing something to appreciate yourself. Anna
Do
Marie?
something to make you happy.
Yeah. And it doesn't require anybody else. So don't come back to me with, well, I told my husband to. Don't don't tell him anything. Let him be him. You be you. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast episode. We appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts on it. If you've made it this far, you're likely someone who is invested in the journey of being the other woman. We understand that this can be a difficult and complex experience, which is why we offer guided coaching to help you heal and move forward. We encourage you to explore the links in the episode description or visit theotherwomanandthewife.com/coaching to learn more about our exclusive coaching program and apply today. Thank you again for your support, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.